Hey guys, this is Grace, and we are on the first batch of cards for my latest 10 handmade cards, one homemade kit. And I'm just showing you all of the things that I've kind of prepped before I started making the cards. I did stamp the flowers a few times and then colored it with some colored pencils because I noticed that I haven't really touched that. And I also did the little flowers and made some backgrounds with that. And then I die cut the hello piece, and then I also did some embossing of some of the sentiment strips. And so now I'm going to work on the first one. And this is the thing that I really wanted to do with that flower stamp, was to create a border wherein the center, I'm going to put the sentiment in the center. And I had to use I think it was about an inch and a quarter strip of masking tape. So I put that in the middle, and then I stamped the flower once on the top and then once on the bottom. And the masking tape basically just covers the part where I don't want the flower to be at. So I use some masking sheet of paper or masking tape from Inkadinkado, and I use my T square ruler to create those lines, and then I'm using a black marker to make sure that that space is kind of identified between the flowers. And again, I use some colored pencils for that, and I really like being able to be reminded of the items that I have in my stash and use them. And also, I don't know if you noticed, but I had them in a little container. It's just a clear plastic container, and I believe that one was supposed to be for like putting pictures, but instead I used that to um, take stuff to work. So I would use like the container to put pencils in, and it's nice because it's small enough, it's thin enough that it could go into my school bag, and that I could bring my scrapbook stuff to work on when I have an open time during in between periods. So now I am going to stamp the sentiment. Sorry. I just woke up and the kids are still sleeping, so I wanted to do this voiceover while the house is still quiet, and so my voice is still, it's just woke up, so I still have to kind of practice a little bit before. Anyways, so I am stamping happy birthday. I did kind of audition the different sentiments in that script font stamp set, and there were some my ideas that I wanted it to be filled, because that whole big space is basically my focal point. So I wanted that to be filled, and I was thinking of you, but I think the happy birthday, like just the two words fit better for this space. I am planning on heat embossing the sentiment, and so I rubbed my powder pouch a little bit first, and then I using I think that's Hampton Arts embossing powder. Now, there's a part in the first P that just wasn't sticking, and I remembered I had one of those embossing pens, and so that's what I did. That white one that you see in the bottom right of my screen, that's the embossing pen, and I've had that for years, but I'm really happy that I have that, because then I can do those little touch-ups, and then my sentiment would look good. And so now I'm going to adhere that on a craft cardstock. Remember, I am using just white or craft cardstock as my base, but then also I have some pattern papers, and so I wanted to use that up. And so I'm going to cut this piece just a little bit smaller than the card base, and then basically mat my piece. I also ran my tracing tool all around my white piece just so that it will have that stitched detail. Now I was thinking of doing the black, but then it just it was a little too dark for me, and so I'm gonna go with this yellow one because it has that pop of color, and also there's yellow in my flower, so I thought that would coordinate really well. This is going to be a fairly flat card. I'm not gonna put fun foam on the bottom because I do like to mail or send my cards to people, and most of my friends and my family, they're not local, and so I like to keep a few cards that are not so lumpy and bumpy so I can mail it. And then I'm adding some finishing touches with the enamel dots. I will add some the flowers are fine, but I just feel like it needed a little bit more shine, and so I'm using my Nuvo pen, the glimmer pen, and I'm just going to run that through and make sure that it has a little bit of shine. And I also noticed that it makes the colors of the colored pencils kind of come to life a little bit more. So that's card number one, and now we go on to card number two. Now this one, again, I wanted to use the flower, and so I've already colored it and also added my Nuvo shimmer pen over the colors. Now, one thing that I'm still a beginner for is coloring. I'm not like, I don't know which colors are best and what would look good. And so if you notice that blue one, I think that's a little too dark for my liking, but I've already colored it when that one of the flowers I've already colored blue, and I didn't want to redo the card, and so it's just gonna be like that. But one mental note, if you're going to try this, is start with a lighter colored pen or pencil and then work your way to the darker, because when it's too dark and you don't like it, then you'll just be disappointed, because that's how I feel about that blue flower. Although that's not so bad, but I just feel like the the flower could have been or should have been a little bit lighter. And I also wanted to try how the flower is going on the edges. I've seen people do that for their flower cards, and that was one of the things that I wanted to try out, was just have the flowers kind of not be the center, not be on the center of the card, but rather on the edges. And I really like that look as well. It acted as kind of a, in scrapbooking, you have like photo corners, and so it acted kind of like that, as photo corners. And also it also kind of looked like it's kind of coming from a vine, so that's kind of nice. Now remember I pulled out that white and black striped paper, and so I wanted to pull that out again, and this time I will be using that here. I feel like that's a good kind of in-between color between the craft and also the white cardstock. And again, I had heat embossed a few of these sentiments, the strip sentiments, and I heat embossed that on black and white cardstock, and so I have some choices or I have a few to choose from. So I'm going to go with the white cardstock base here, since I did a craft on the other side. And as you can see, I've actually made a mistake with stamping that flower, so I just turned over the paper and then redid it. Again, I colored that while I was at work, or I had time at work, so you didn't see me do the coloring. Now I have to say, if I were to add all of the hours that I did with this card kit, of course you won't see all of that, but I would probably say I've spent at least 5 hours making these cards. Now that totals to just 30 minutes a card if it's 10, and that's why I like doing mass productions of cards, breaking it down and then doing them kind of in bulk. And this is another trick or technique that I had wanted to do with the cards is, or especially with the flowers, is I wanted to do kind of that wrap around type of design around it. And I really love how this turned out. Basically what I did was I stamped it on the four corners first, and then after that I stamped it top and the bottom. So I just kind of moved my stamp to where, so that it will show the specific flowers that I wanted it to show. And again, I colored that with some colored pencils, and then I'm going to be putting the sentiment right in the center. And again, I am using two different sentiment stamps so that it will have an interesting look. We have the script, and then we'll do the sentiment phrase on the bottom so that we'll have two of them there. And I really love how this turned out. Now, I didn't stamp this on white paper. I just stamped it on the back of one of the pattern papers. And that's another way that you can use up papers that you don't care about, is if they're just single-sided, you can use the back side of it for as acting as your white cardstock. And I'm just using a scrap piece of paper to hold my leftover embossing powder as I pour it, and then I just funnel that back into the bottle. And another thing that helped me to make sure that I did a good impression with the flowers was I did use my stamp positioner, which I think that's I don't know specifically what it's called, but I know that's a Tim Holtz one. And so that's what I use. And it really helps because I had to stamp the flowers 3 or 4 times in order for me to get a good impression. So now that I have that, I will do the background piece that will go in between my craft cardstock and also this white piece. And I just cut that. So if my card base is 4.25 by 5.5, this little piece would be 4" and 5.25. And then my other piece would be 3.25 by 5.25. Yeah, something like that. And I couldn't leave it behind without adding a few more enamel dots. And I like to start off with the smallest one because I feel like as far as the size of it, it just works perfectly for, a card. So that is card number 3. Now we're going to move on to card number 4, and this time around I am going to use one of the background pieces that I created. So basically I just use that smaller stamp set from Pretty Pink Posh, and then I just single stamped all of these little leaves and flowers with my Distress ink pads. And I'm auditioning a few papers that I think would be good as backgrounds for this. And the green one, actually, when I'm looking at it right now, I feel like the green one would look really kind of springy. It's fresh. But I am going to actually end up with the purple dot one. I think that brings out that small purple flower. And so that is what I'm going to go for. I also wanted to kind of use this piece not as a whole block, instead as little kind of, I look at it like shutters, like little smaller pieces. And so that's what I'm kind of calculating here, is how many even rectangles can I get with this piece that it would work well with my A2 card size. And so that's what I'm counting here. And I think I ended up with, this one is about 1.25 inches width by 3-inch length. And so that's why I'm auditioning it again, just kind of seeing which one would work best. And then I'm going to go with the purple one. And if you are wanting to try this kind of technique and you don't want to spend the time stamping those little flowers, you can also just use, just a regular pattern paper and cut that into size. And this would work really well too if you wanted to use scraps of paper. So again, I'm just adding some pen, or not pen stitching, but stitching design on the edges of it. You won't really see that one really well unless you see it from up close, but I just like that little detail. It just makes that look really good. And so now I'm going to be adding my my little blocks. And what I do here is I add some adhesive first, and I would add adhesive to all of them, and then I would use my T-square ruler to kind of make sure that I get them aligned from top to bottom first, and then I kind of lightly just place them there, not really pushing on the adhesive, and then I will kind of move them around from left to right so we have even spacing in between all that, because right now, as you can see, they're not quite even, especially when I put this last one, and that's totally fine. I just want it, again, I'm using my ruler just to align them from top to bottom first, making sure that they're aligned, and then I will move them from side to side to make sure that they're somewhat even. And then that's when I'm going to push them so that they're all adhered. Now I pre-heat embossed my sentiment. I'm going to go with a thinking of you, and that's just going to go on the center, or on top of the stamped pieces of paper. Again, I wanted to kind of break it down, have a little bit of pattern in between those white papers. And so I'm going to go with this scrap of the diagonal. And I'm also going to be inking the edges of my sentiment just to make it stand out. Now, I don't know yet where I'm going to place this. The center looks good, but I am going to kind of move it around to see if it's better if it goes on the top or on the bottom of the panels. And I think either way would work fine. We just, you just got to figure out which one would look better with with looking at it. And at first, as you can see, I've decided that I'm going to be putting that on the bottom, and I will be adding some fun foam to this just to make it stand out a little bit more. And kind of in the last second, I'm going to change my mind and move my panel in a different place. And see, I'm kind of thinking bottom or top, and I will go with the top, and I like that one so much better. Now, because I did put that on the top, you have pieces of the panel. There's more of the panel that you'll see on the bottom. And so to dress that up, I am adding a few enamel dots on the bottom flowers, just on the flowers, and kind of making sure that I have the colors scattered better. And that's going to be it for card number 4. Oh, I guess I'm going to add one more on the top. And I'm deciding, should I add more to the thinking of you? But eventually I'm just going to skip that. I think that this simple card, the simpleness of this card works better. And that's card number 4. Now we're on to the last card of this video. This is not the last card, of course, because it's only card number 5, but this will be the last card for the video. So if you are not a subscriber, and if you haven't hit that bell button, make sure that you do so, because then you will be informed when I post the other part of this process video. Now I am adding some Nouveau not drops, like Nouveau glimmer mist on each of the flower, but as you can see, I'm stopping in between because I'm actually rubbing the brush off of a scrap of paper on the side of my paper, or on the side of my my work surface because I noticed that it's grabbing the color of the colored pencil, and so I didn't want that to kind of mix together. So that's why I'm rubbing it off every time I change a different color. And you could wait for your shimmer pen or the glitter to dry, but I am impatient, so I'm not going to do that. Instead, I will just carefully kind of work my way around it. And I also have already heat stamped my sentiment, and the stamp is just on the bottom of the flower. Now, this is a very typical thing to do with a flower sentiment, is to place it in the center. And that's one of the things that, of course, anybody could do, especially if it's a big flower stamp. And that's why I wanted to do it here. But I also wanted to kind of, try different placements of the flowers, not just the center design. And again, I'm adhering a pattern paper between the craft cardstock base and also this. Now, you notice that I'm doing craft and craft. I just wanted to kind of make a little bit of a difference. I've been not overlapping, but, doing like a craft cardstock base with a white panel. But now I just kind of wanted to do the tone on tone. But of course, there's different colors in between that. So that breaks up all of the monotony of the craft. And so that's basically the 5 cards that I will be showing you for this batch. I hope that you guys like this video and like the ideas that I've used here. If you do end up doing any of this, please tag me so I can see how your cards turn out. If you are ever participating in my 10 handmade cards, 1 homemade kit, make sure that you share it so that I could share some or give you some love on your projects too. And I can't wait to show you the next 5 cards.